Ignore these dates. These are lower parts than our training center. I don't know if you try to understand it a little bit more.
The race is always good.
Or you can.
Yes, sir, I'm ready.
I'd like to call the meeting to order. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moment of silence, please. Thank you. Need to adopt the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions? I move that we adopt the agenda.
A second.
Motion made and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Budget discussion with budget. Holders. I
Okay.
haven't heard that before.
Well, many times we call them department heads, but we have some agencies and some departments. I just call them budget holders.
Sounds like a folder.
There are five budget holders who the board has expressed interest in speaking with, or who have expressed interest in speaking with the board. They're listed within the agenda item to be the registrar and electoral board, library board, school superintendent, fire and rescue association, company representatives, and social services director. Of those, the fire and rescue folks reached out to me and asked if they could start. They have other obligations, and so if there's no objection from the board, they would like to speak to the board about the funding that is included in my proposed budget. I hear no objection. Who's the spokesperson for Mr. Bebout?
Yes, I'd like to lead off with kind of the introduction, and I'd like to have some of the chiefs and presidents support particular parts of that. Before I start, or anybody else starts, what's the protocol here? Would you like us to stand before you, or where would you like it?
I would suggest it's informal, but that's up to the board.
Yeah, we can hear you fine, wherever you're comfortable.
Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with.
Handout here.
Thank you.
Okay, members of the board, My name is Harold Beebout, Piedmont District, speaking as president of the Rappahannock County Fire and Rescue Association. So I wanted to start off by telling you that Fire and Rescue in 2018 did an outstanding job. As you see on the piece of paper I handed out, we responded to 1,036 EMS calls, 294 fire calls. Every call was answered. An ambulance for EMS calls was on scene within 20 minutes, 98% of the time, which, given remote areas of the county and the fact that some of these we have to get up in the middle of the night, get dressed, get to the station, get the apparatus out, I think is an amazing achievement. So I'm very proud of our work. And whilst many people worry about our volunteer fire and rescue, what I'm also very proud of is the chart on the next page showing how we've improved in terms of response times over the last 4 years. So, I can't promise you that we will continue to improve because it's hard to get better than that. And I can't promise you that we will be this good forever. But we're doing well now. And some of you, I think, have heard this before, but it happened on a call a few weeks ago at Flatwood. The state representative from Office of Emergency Management, Office of Emergency Services, happened to be there. She saw 2 medic units on scene within a few minutes, a rescue engine on scene within a few minutes, many volunteers doing their job effectively. And her summary was, Rappahannock rocks. So moving to the heart of what we're here to talk to you about. We appreciate the full funding of our operational costs. And thank you for that. We do appreciate it. But from our point of view, what sort of happened was you kind of put some money in our front pocket and took it out of our back pocket. So let me explain it. So the gap, so we're sitting well with respect to operational funding. In terms of helping the companies with large payments for their apparatus, they're kind of sitting high and dry. And the reason for that is that in the current year, we had 100,000 divided equally among the 7 companies to cover apparatus payments for folks who had bought equipment in years past, owe that money. And in earlier years, up until 2018, 10,000 could come out of the operational costs to go for those loan payments. Or some departments then would put it aside in a fund to buy equipment once they had enough money in that account. That was eliminated, so-called Category F, was eliminated by the Fire Levy Board in 2018. So that was okay in this year because we had the 100,000 in the so-called apparatus replacement fund. Then in the proposed budget, that got eliminated. So we had stated in the 20 budget. That's, so, any questions that I can answer? Okay. Can I ask a few of our chiefs and presidents to speak if you don't have any questions?
I have questions.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So is this is a request for funds to pay for existing loan obligations on current apparatus?
Several departments have that. I think
Right.
at least 4, maybe 5 departments have those existing things.
Yeah, and I'm involved in Company 1, so I'm familiar with that and I know what you're referencing. Have we been presented a list of what the loan obligations are? I'm sure we have that at our disposal. I'm sure there are some companies that have a greater burden than others.
There are.
Are- Is there any, I mean, you said that this had been spread evenly between the companies in the past. Stands to reason, though, that some companies have a larger burden than others. Is it then up to the association to decide who gets the 100,000 or how that's apportioned, or am I missing? Or
Certainly up through this point, we've divided that equally among us.
between 7?
Yes.
Okay.
So the 100,000 this year was divided by 7.
So what about future apparatus going forward? Is that this money also for any new apparatus acquisition that companies feel they need to do, replacement, et cetera?
Yes, and I think some of the
We're gonna get some of that.
chiefs and presidents will present that in the next
Okay.
meeting.
And I'll just, okay, so maybe they can, when they tell us or talk to us, because I have heard that I think it's been pretty, it's been documented, we're pretty apparatus heavy. And I understand, maybe I'm wrong. So, and I understand that, you know, just because you have to have redundancy, you can't just have a couple vehicles. But it seems like there may be a lot of redundancy and overlap. Maybe I'm wrong. So, you know, when I see this for apparatus, I just want to make sure it's going to what's really needed in the county and not because, hey, we got the money, let's go out and get this.
I'll let
Yeah.
my colleagues speak to most of this.
Those are my only
But-
questions.
I would just make 2 points. One, yeah, if you look at the list of apparatus, it looks long. On the other hand, 3-4 days ago, article in the paper today, there were actually 2 simultaneous brush fires. And in the past, we've had as many as 4 or 5 simultaneous wildfires. Every piece of equipment we have in the county that is useful for that purpose gets deployed. Every tanker we have in the county, we have 5 of them, I believe. Every piece of brush apparatus, the attack pieces that can get to the fire, all of those are deployed. So what I think a lot of people don't understand is, and I don't want to go through the whole thing here, but to effectively fight all the different threats we have in Rapp County, from wildfires right now, yesterday was a near red flag day, to a major fire which luckily we haven't had for a while, in a high school, in the co-op, in the courthouse. You know, those 2 kinds of things require such different apparatus to effectively fight them. So, yes, we have quite a few pieces of specialty equipment, but they all have an important purpose. So, anyway.
Just to add, Paul Comar from the Stonewall Hawthorne District.
Assistance to Firefighters grant out of FEMA has yielded to the much bigger cities in the country and are giving them millions of dollars, and rural companies like ours get zero. If I applied for an AFG grant years ago to just get a brush truck and was denied. Company 2 applied for a tower and it was denied 2 years in a row. Our first SCBA grant request that we submitted was denied, and we've submitted again. AFG is not in favor of the rural companies. They're in favor of the paid departments in New York, in Chicago, in Pittsburgh, in LA. So those dollars don't come to us. Now, what does come to us out of the Rescue Squad Assistance Fund, who we just got radios through, the individual companies can apply for and get a 50-50 or an 80-20 grant against an ambulance. That's great, because that's really, really helpful when you start looking at the price of an ambulance at $240,000 or more as we progress through the years in the out years. So that's very helpful. The problem is, even on a Rescue Squad Assistance Fund, at 80-20 on a $250,000 grant, we're still required to come up with $50,000. Some of that can be done with fundraising. Some of it can be done with letter drives, et cetera, to help us raise that money. But that's a savings that you have to accumulate those dollars over a period of years. When you start looking at the age of the apparatus within Rappahannock County, you will see that the ages, there are some newer pieces up to maybe 2015 or 2014 on some of the apparatus, but the other stuff goes back to 1998, 1986. And those are coming up with a replacement cycle that says, hey, it's more than 20 years old, it's more than 25 years old. We really need to come up to the latest and greatest NFPA requirements. Several companies are accustomed to buying used vehicles, which helps from a cost advantage, and it takes what we're now spending on maintenance costs on these older trucks, and that's escalating. It will then put a new truck in place with a slightly lower maintenance cost for a longer period of time. And I didn't bring enough copies, but I'm more than happy to share this. You can pass it down the line. Basically, the blue is EMS, where we have grants. The red is fire trucks, where we do not have grant capabilities. And if you start looking at the numbers in the red, 200, 300, 400, 500, $750,000 to replace a truck, it becomes extremely difficult in the out years to replace aging equipment. You're doing that now with your own infrastructure, your buildings that need maintenance, need upgrades and everything else. We're in the same boat as you are. We have some capital outlays that we have to meet. All we're asking for is the $100,000 to help us save towards some of those goals. And whether we buy brand new trucks is dependent on where the money is at and what the condition is of the previous truck. Now that's from an association vantage point, and I'll also represent Castleton in this regard. Over the years, Castleton has always been a company that was in the lower tier of the funding elements for whatever reason, some of it dating back to when the fire levy started and how people submitted budgets at that point in time. But Castleton lost the Castleton Festival, where we made a great deal of money. And a couple of years ago, when Mr. Mizell passed away, the money evaporated. The fundraising capability of Castleton in its remote area isn't the main drag of 211, where you can put up a sign and 1,000 people will come. We can put out a publication, put it in a newspaper, and we might get 100, maybe. We've held dinners, we've held breakfasts, we've held shooting matches and a variety of things. And our biggest take was when Cougar was here. We were able to go to the Cougar events and make money. And he's not holding any of those anymore. Even the 4th of July, where we set up in the 4th of July with weather conditions, tailgaters, people who bring their own food, they're not buying food from us. So we go out and spend $2,000 worth of product and sell less than $1,000 worth of sales, you're losing money. You can't hold that event if you're going to lose money. So we've canceled so many of those. So we don't have the opportunity to do the big fundraisers, a carnival, a parade, a 4th of July, etc. So those are kind of impacts that this lack of $100,000 in this budget affects us drastically. So, like I said, the operational expenses went up, and we absolutely thank you for that. That's been a long time coming, since the beginning of the fire levy board. Okay? I actually have a chart that I will share with Mr. Curry, and he can pass it on to you all, but I can show you what every budget was since the beginning of the fire levy board. And when you take a look at those budgets, you say, well, gee, how's this company making it? And it's through the hard work that we do. So, again, this is kind of even a more special request that's coming from Castleton. We need that those dollars, that $14,000, to help us save up for the anticipated purchase of a tanker and an engine, which turned 25 years old in a couple of years. And ours is the only tanker in the county that is a short wheelbase, 1,000 gallons less than everybody else's, but we can go in most roads where those big tankers can't go. So we end up being the prime tanker on the spot, running back up a driveway or down an old dirt road just to have the big tankers fill us up and then take it back to the fire. We did that on Eagle's Nest when a structure fire up there. So again, this is extremely important to us to help us replace our equipment as it's getting almost as old as me. Thank you.
Could I ask a question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If you don't mind?
Sure.
Eagles Nest, did that Big Brown Hall?
On Strider. Right above the church.
Okay.
That was a couple years back.
Confused myself, but I understand the ability to short wheelbase versus a long wheelbase. Certain things you can't do.
And double tandem, long wheelbase, you can't maneuver it down a driveway.
But isn't NFPA more like guidelines? I mean, they're not requirements, right?
That is correct, but the reason we're replacing our SCBA bottles is we are now into the 3rd iteration of the SCBA bottles, where they have newer features that we need to have for an interior firefighter. Yes, they're just guidelines, but if something were to happen and some lawyer would pick up on the NFPA guidelines and say, your truck doesn't meet these guidelines, why are you fighting this fire? We try our best to keep up with those standards, but we need to move up to newer trucks which already have some of those standards in. Even if we're buying a used truck, there's plenty of used trucks coming out of New York and Chicago and big cities like that that are less than 10 years old. And we're able to buy those, but it still costs $150,000, $200,000 to buy a used truck. So that, I know that's the approach that Castleton will take, and I can speak for a few other companies because they've been successful at buying a used truck and setting the old one aside or selling it and help making that payment. But when you go out and buy a brand new tanker at $500,000, yeah, you can sell your old tanker and make $75,000 and help your loan payment. But you still have to make, for every $100,000, it's approximately $13,000 in loan payments per 100,000. So we just got done in January of 2018. We paid off our truck loans, and now we're commencing that saving process so that we can prepared to replace the tanker first and the engine second, 3 years later, 4 years later. As far as the quantity of equipment, if you look at each of the equipments from a strategic standpoint, we have a rescue engine in Chester Gap, one in Amosville, one in Sperryville, that can get to the outreaches of the rest of the first dues when necessary. Everybody has a fire engine. Rescue engines can be used as fire engines, but they're primarily outfitted for rescue. So then the attack pieces come in. Those attack pieces are amongst all the companies, and on structure fires, we're pulling at least 4 engines and all 5 tankers. So the brush trucks are evenly spread. And again, as Harold said, you know, we respond March of last year, we were going crazy with brush fires, and literally would just run from one to the other, barely having enough time to fill up with water. Ambulances are well spread. When you really look at where the apparatus is, what its purpose is, and where it has to go to, I think you'll see that and understand that we have to maintain some kind of a balance. People's opinion of whether it's too much, too little, unless you're a firefighter and you deal with the incidents that we've had to deal with in Rappahannock County, it's really hard to sit back and say you got too much apparatus. It's hard.
So Paul,
Yes, sir.
we don't know how much money that individual fire and rescue departments have in their checking account, their savings, et cetera. We know that some of them have a lot more than others. So if we divide this money equally, you know, near 14,000 goes to you that need it, and 14,000 is going to go to another company that may not need it. And we all know and appreciate, you know, the overall money we're saving by having all volunteer departments. And so in the event that you all would get in a jam where you needed a piece of equipment or a payment or whatever, you're in a jam, you could easily come to the county and just get that out of the contingency fund. And nobody in their right mind would object to that. So this is not, I don't look at this as taking away anything from y'all. It's just putting it into another bucket where it's available as needed.
The other bucket that you're referring to, if you would accumulate that money and allow it to be an apparatus replacement fund,
Right.
and accumulate it and
Right.
don't use it as you
Right.
do the rollovers from year to year, that makes sense. But if you're applying the money in that portion of the budget,
Right.
adding it back in and
Right.
saying, oh, by the way, we need new radios, we need this, or whatever it is that we
Right.
need,
Right.
and all of a sudden you spend it, where are we at? Okay?
So what we're talking about is strictly for apparatus. Is that I mean, right.
And capital, you know, just like anything, capital, and I know there's differences of opinion here, but let's assume that capital is something that we pay for, okay? And that's the way it's defined for us. If the payment, for example, became part of operational expenses, your fire levy costs would go up at a more rapid rate on the payments. And to answer Mr. Lisinski's one question, the current amount of money that the companies, and it's 3 of them that are paying for their trucks, is $81,000 a year. When you start taking those red numbers and adding it to that, you'll see that the incline of expenses or payments will go up drastically. I looked at it. I mean, I actually ran the numbers by taking each of the trucks and bringing it into.
What's the interest typically on payments for apparatus?
I don't recall right offhand, but when we finished paying off our loan, it was a $200,000 loan, and it was 26 $26,000 a year that we had to pay. The similar trucks and other companies, and I'm sure they can talk to it, but it averages out to be 13,000 per hundred, so.
So, a couple of other, this is a little bit off the subject, but a couple of, like Amosville and Chester Gap, they get money from other counties. Does Castleton?
No.
Don't get anything from Culpeper?
No. With that money comes an obligation that's bigger than we are, okay? We get called into mutual aid on the Egg Burnsville side and on the 522
Right.
side
Right.
for fire and
Right.
EMS.
Right.
And we're real close to Egg Burnsville, so we can get there faster than Medic 12 or Company 11 or any of those out of Culpeper. And we do that as mutual aid. But if I was to get funding from them,
Right.
then they wouldn't bother sending their units, they would just send us. And we only have one ambulance. I would be robbing Rappahannock to support Culpeper.
Got it. Got it.
And they have bigger budgets along with a $50,000 capital improvement budget for each company in Culpeper.
Would it be all right if I try to refocus our conversation or focus? The fire levy tax has bring in $1.1 million a year. And I've allocated all of those dollars in my proposed budget. And included in that is all of the operational costs as required by the agreement that the board signed, and $45,000 for emergency grants, and $39,000 for contingency. So it seems to me that if the fire community, rescue community is asking the board to provide 100% operational funding plus some portion of capital need, that's fine. And the board can provide those funds in excess of your requirements under the agreement. The big question is, from where do those funds come? And you have the $84,000 that I just mentioned in those two buckets, in excess of the operational, the $45,000 and the $39,000. You could allocate those to capital needs of the company. You could use general fund dollars to supplement fire service fund dollars to provide additional funds to the companies. You could raise the tax rates in the fire services fund under the fire levy to provide more funding to the fire companies to provide operational and some portion of capital. So all of the express need for equipment, obviously they need equipment, and eventually a strategic plan will define what is needed and why it's needed. But the crux of the matter is, how much funding are you going to provide in excess of 100% operational funding to the companies, and where is it going to come from?
I don't know if you remember, I've tried unsuccessfully to break up the money that's going for the radio system, not all of it out of the fire levy fund, because the schools will be using, hopefully, that's general fund, and the sheriff's department will be using the radios, that's general fund. But somehow everything's being paid out of the fire levy. And I did try it. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
So any capital expenditure can be provided for from your, from the fire services fund balance, which is relatively small now, or from the general fund balance, which is larger.
Still not very large.
So Paul, we get some hard questions. Let me ask you a tough one.
Sure.
What do I tell the taxpayers who say, well, there's $200,000 or $150,000 sitting in a company bank account right now? What's going on with that money, and what's that money being spent on? And not every company has that, I understand that, but some do.
Can I respond to that? I'm Todd
Sure.
Summers, I'm the chief of Company 7, Sperryville, Piedmont District. I took over for Harold, so we have more time with the association. If you look at our bank accounts right now, we look kind of fat, right? But if you look a little bit into the future, you realize that we're about to spend at least $240,000 on a new ambulance. And in order to hold that ambulance, we have to build a new bay on the side of our snapshot. You gotta look at our needs over time. We've been saving up our money to allow us to make these investments. The ambulance we have, right now we're trying to replace is 2001. It's not safe, it's hard to replace parts, it doesn't have any of the restraints that we should be using as personnel in those ambulances, so it's times, 20 years, but there's a bunch of expenses. So we've been saving money we get from the capital. EMS companies get reimbursed for some of the services we provide. We do fundraising, we do annual letters, etc. So all that we put away, and we've been saving in a really methodical way, thanks to Harold's foresight, to spend these things. So I'd just be a little bit careful around looking at bank balances at a single moment in time. We're challenged to fund things. I mean, just the cost of the little life pack that we use that does our monitoring and can shock someone if they have a heart attack, those are $35,000. The battery for my cot, $450. So we're spending money all the time. Some of it we get back thanks to the generosity of the board from the fire levy, but a lot of stuff we have to pay for out of our own pocket. So it is really important that you consider the totality of all that we're doing. The amount of the money that we get from this capital fund, the $100,000, is important. It's also modest relative to the cost of the things that we're trying to take care of. Thank you.
Thanks, Howard.
So I'm not sure how the board wants to proceed with this. You can receive your input, and then by what ultimately needs to happen today or tomorrow is I need to know what we should advertise for our public hearing on the 22nd, and the public will be addressing whatever is advertised. And then there will be a lot of time between April 22nd and your adoption, probably a month or so, or maybe a little less than a month, mid-May, for additional changes to be made based on that input from the public before you adopt your final budget. But if there is any inclination as to increasing taxes to support requested expenses, then we'll need to know that as we advertise the tax rate for the tax rate public hearing, so that you have the leeway to do that, and that's something I put on the agenda after you talk to everybody.
And the cutoff for that is Monday
Pretty much, yeah. That needs to be in the paper next paper.
because of the
It has to be in the paper 7 days ahead of the public hearing.
And I know we have more speakers
Yes.
here, but also, just want to note, you, county administration, recommends that we advertise a higher rate than needed to balance the proposed budget.
Yes, balance my proposed budget and balance your proposed budget, just because you don't know what the public is going to come out and say during the public hearing, and some of the things that you've heard here today, and we give you leeway to provide additional funding if you so desired by the time you adopt it. If you advertise it at the exact rate that it takes the budget to fund, you could not increase it after that public hearing.
Let me add just one quick thing. The emergency fund dollars they've had 5 utilizations in the last 20 years. One was to replace a roof on one of the stations. The other was to replace the heating system. The third was to replace the tank in our current tanker, because it was $26,000 to replace the tank because it had actually ruptured due to improper fabrication. And the company went out of business, and ProPoly, the maker of the tank, had voided the warranty to the company because they never paid for the tank. So that was the fourth item, and the fifth item was an engine repair to Washington's engine. Those were the 5 different times that the emergency fund was utilized, and the last one was 3 years ago. So as far as the companies go, and we've kind of raised that emergency fund up and basically said, if it's greater than 10% of your annual allocation, then it's an emergency. So if you think about premium time, you have an hourly rate and you have a premium hourly rate, it's anything over the hourly rate that becomes the premium. In the case of here, if my allocation is $75,000 a year, 7,500 of that could go towards my emergency repair, and all I would be requesting is the difference between the 7,500 and what the actual emergency repair costs. At that time, you can then reach into the general fund if you needed to provide that. But the probability of that occurring, we're covering some of this under operational, so you can plan for an emergency within your contingency fund of the general fund and use the fire levy funds to give back to the fire and rescue. Just an option.
That's the emergency grants line item in the budget.
Right. I would suggest that if some departments are collecting dollars out of the apparatus replacement and then building them up in their bank account, the county can build them up in our bank account. But if capital obligations are the responsibility of the companies according to the agreement, then they should be funding those, unless they can't, in which case they can come to the board and say, we can't cover our bills. And then you can pay for it through emergency or whatever other discretionary means the board has. If capital funds are to be included in the annual conveyance to the companies, then we should memorialize that in the agreement.
I'd like to add something. Michael Nevich, I'm the president of the Chester Gap Fire Department. And yes, Chester Gap does have a fire department. Most people don't even know that. The concern I have that we're talking about here is we're talking about this like, well, we can get emergency funding if we have the truck problems. Okay, that's great for 1 year, but are you going to do that every year? You know, when we talk about these vehicles, we're not talking about a one-shot $15,000 or $30,000 or $50,000 expenditure. You know, even with a used vehicle, you know, we have 2 vehicles that aren't, oh, actually 3 vehicles that all go out on fires that aren't even in this millennium. And 2 of them are in dire need of replacement. One of them is, we literally, when we were coming up 522 to get fuel, we were going 25 miles an hour when we got to the top of the mountain. Something was going wrong with the engine. Okay, so that needs to get replaced. That vehicle to get replaced with new, because I've heard complaints about, well, why do we buy so much used equipment, is $450,000 by itself. The other vehicle, we've got the rescue engine, like has been pointed out, it's 1 of 3 in the county. It's got $100,000 of repairs that are needing to get done, or get a new one. Where's that 50,000? Are we going to get that next year too if we get the 50,000 this year to get the repairs done? So my concern here is you're making it sound like, well, we've got these one-off deals, it's no big deal, but the problem is we can't, as a fire department, hope. We have to plan strategically, especially over expenditure years where dollars of this size are going out every year. Why do we have so many vehicles? I beg of you, come up to Chester Gap in the middle of January when you got 6 inches of snow on the ground. I dare you to come up in June when it's raining. We got some roads up there that billy goats don't want to go on, much less have to take a piece of fire apparatus down to go fight a fire. And to ask you, and to answer your question about, well, what do we tell the constituents? Do you want to be the person who says, no, we're not going to fund this, and then have to look at the family members of the people who died because we couldn't get to their fire, because we don't have the right apparatus to fight it? This isn't an easy conversation, I get that part. We're talking about monies that have to come from somebody. But when we talk about this, you sound like, well, we can just fundraise more. Really? Have we looked at the numbers of the people who are in the fire companies? We're already talking about having a problem getting enough people who aren't in their 50s to fight fires. And oh wait, now we got to take off an entire weekend so we can fundraise too, because the county's not fully funding us. At what point do we realize we're stretching these volunteers to the point of, you want to know why we don't get 30-year-olds? Because they got families. And we're asking them to come out not just to fight fires at 2 in the morning, nor lay next to their wives or husbands, or the fact that they're taking away all the free time away from their families just to fight fires or go to emergency calls. No, let's also ask them to do all the fundraising because the county's not willing to cover the cost to operate. But oh, we want to take advantage of what they do. To me, from my perspective, it's disingenuous for you to look at us and say, well, why do we have to give you money? My question to you is, why shouldn't we look at you and ask us, why aren't you funding us better? You guys paid $60,000 a couple years ago to have a study done. When the study got over, it didn't tell you we had too many pieces of equipment. It told you we didn't have enough stations. It didn't tell you you should fund less. It should tell you you should fund more. And yet now when you're looking at us, saying, well, why should we give you the $100,000? I ask you, why aren't you giving us more than the $100,000? Those trucks aren't going to cost $15,000 a year to pay for. Not even close. Not even for used ones. But you look at us and say, well, you should just take it out of where? What rectal orifice do you think we can pull this money out of? We haven't already tried. If Castleton could have a carnival the size of Amosville, do you think they would have? Think of Chester Gap, who wasn't paying more for insurance fees then it was taken in on those carnivals, we wouldn't still be having it? Of course we would. We're not stupid. We're just not gonna waste our money doing nothing. And so, instead of wasting everybody's time here looking at us saying, well, why aren't this money coming from somewhere else? Why are you asking us? You should be looking at us and saying, hey, we're not just gonna give you 100, we're gonna give you 250 or fully fund those trucks.
I think they're very good points, and I would say that if the agreement that was worked on over many, many years doesn't provide a sustainable funding path forward, then it should. But right now, all parties of that agreement essentially stated, this is what is necessary to make the fire companies work. 100% operational funding. And so if that isn't adequate and 100% operational funding is not enough, then that's a very important conversation that has to happen. And then the board then has to have a difficult conversation of, do we need to raise tax rates in order to fund capital? Now, the board is holding up their entire obligation to
And I'm
the
not saying you're not.
companies. Yeah.
Well, what I'm suggesting is what's current is barely good enough, but more needs to be done. What we're talking about is the funding for these vehicles, and we are, right? I mean, that is what we're here to talk about. We're talking about whether we keep the 100,000 stand pat or not. I don't see how it's even a discussion.
We're not stupid either. I mean, we know that the alternative is way more expensive than what we got here. The county is not about to let any of the companies go without the equipment that they need. It's just not going to happen. It's just you know, how it looks on paper. It seems to be a problem right now.
And it may need to be addressed through revising the fire services agreement.
Don't disagree.
I mean, I think it is somewhat an organizational issue in the way that the line items are broken out this year. Like Gary pointed out, there is almost $85,000 available. It is marked at the Board of Supervisors' discretion, and it looks like those monies could be used.
On a year in and year out basis, like I said, that's great. We got emergency. That's not a great strategic annual planning tool for the individual companies.
Right.
And that's the problem, is we can't, you do realize that even if today we said we need a new truck, we're not getting a truck today. I'm not talking about new either. New, you can wait a year. I'm talking about used. Used, we A, gotta find a piece of equipment that'll work. B, I mean, not only
No, I
will work as a
understand.
function, but will work for our needs. Like our attack truck, perfect example. This vehicle, it's what we take on these bill-of-go paths, because no attack truck in the, or no pumper in the county can go down some of the roads in Chesapeake. That attack truck, the chief has been looking for 6 months to find a used one, and it doesn't exist. So when we're talking about emergency funding, that's great, but that doesn't help us for strategically planning for the purchases we can afford to make. And hoping that you'll approve $85,000 to buy that equipment, that's not strategic planning. That's hoping. Unless you've got a bucket of wishes and happiness that I'm unaware of, we can't count on it. We have to count on, we can strategically count on annually to be able to afford to buy that vehicle.
I get it, we just spent $110,000 on a new attack vehicle in Company One.
Right.
And looked for something used, had to build it from the ground up, basically. And as Paul said, really weren't any grant funds to
No.
offset the cost of that. Maybe
No.
a piece of gear here and
Right,
there
right,
that went
right.
on there.
Right.
So, but is it Mike? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Our job's to ask the hard questions. Don't misconstrue
No, and I'm not-
that
and I'm not
because we're
blaming you.
asking hard questions that we're not.
And I'm trying to give you the answers to those hard questions.
I understand, but.
So
just-
it's my concern is we talk of this almost like an ethereal of it. Like there's some, yeah, it's not today, it's tomorrow, it's next week, whatever. Can't we just, sure. But that's not the problem today. If today, I mean, we're still in that problematic area of where we could have wildfire issues. Again, it's just talking about us being able to, as volunteers, get the equipment out to fight the fires or do the emergency services needed in the county. And so, like I said, going back to the 100,000, I appreciate it's been worked on for months. But the fact that it was even discussed that it would go down is stunning to me. Because down is not the direction it needs to go. So that's sort of the point I was trying to make. Is not just for now answering the question of what's on the table, should it go down or not, no. But future in any conversation happening moving forward. Up is the only logical answer. At least if you want to have your house fire put out or your loved one taken to a hospital.
If there's no further information on fire and rescue, then the board has any other direction, we can just go down the list that I have included in the agenda packet, which would put the registrar and electoral board up next.
Okay. Members of the board, my name is Hurley Smith. I'm secretary of the electoral board. Denise Chandler is chairperson, and I'd like to introduce Kit Farb, who is our newest member. I'd like to welcome her. And of course, Kim McKiernan, who you all know. The Board of Electors is urging that the Director of Elections be acknowledged as a department head in the county. And then it clearly follows that the compensation for this position must be brought in line with other Rappahannock County department heads, more particularly the treasurer, as we'll discuss below. This is essentially a matter of fairness, and it's a serious proposal. Now, the Director of Elections clearly performs supervisory and managerial duties equal to that of department heads. For those who don't know what the registrar currently does, or who have an outdated 25-year-old version of it in mind, and for our TV audience, the following is an up-to-date summary of what she does. It's rather extensive, but I think in fairness, I think it's necessary that we go through this to make a record of what she does. So, she recruits, trains, and supervises over 40 election officials, supervises and trains the assistant registrar. She oversees operations of the Office of Voter Registration under the supervision of the Electoral Board in accordance with state and federal law. She oversees voter registration process, including online registration, DMV registrations. And just as an aside there, these come in every day, and they're always screwed up, and they require substantial effort and time to straighten out. She handles the rest of the process, cancellations for felony violations or debt, eligibility determination, denial notification process in accordance with the State Board of Election guidelines. She conducts all town, local, state, federal elections in accordance with Commonwealth law. She supervises all absentee voting, including the new no-excuse early absentee voting. She manages the department budget to maintain an effective election program, compensation for election officials, training location rental fees, and polling location rental fees. She provides contingency planning in accordance with known election schedules and possible election schedules, and she budgets for each of them. She prepares for emergency situations on election day, including natural disasters. She trains all election officials on emergency procedures. She establishes alternate locations and alerts them to be prepared to allow access in the event of an emergency. She oversees the maintenance of all voter registration records, correspondence files, and poll books in accordance with established record retention guidelines. She ensures data from elections is accurately transferred from poll books to the State Board of Elections after each election. She oversees the maintenance of the voter registration system, including street files, to ensure that changes to election districts, precincts, and polling places are up to date. Statewide redistricting is coming in 2021, which will add to this burden. She reviews, revises, approves, and submits all ballot styles for primary, special, and general elections. She oversees candidate filings and campaign finance reporting consistent with state law and State Board of Election guidelines. She reviews and verifies signatures on candidate petitions, enters and qualifies candidates in the state database once all requirements have been met. She attends comprehensive mandated training each year
and arranges for the Board of Electors to receive mandatory training. She institutes new programs to streamline voting efficiency. For example, at Central Absentee Voting Precinct, she procured new voting machines, and she procured the ability to have photo ID capability in her office. She's implemented electronic poll books for accuracy and improved voter check-in on election day. She ensures accurate poll books are downloaded and operational for each election. She implemented the two-factor authentication in concert with the Virginia Department of Elections. This is a program to protect against hacking and involves a very complicated login system. She handles voting equipment procurement, maintenance, and testing. She interfaces with the Department of Elections and VERIS, the state database, and the technicians to troubleshoot and improve operations. She monitors, tracks, analyzes, and implements federal and state legislative initiatives with regard to election law. Election laws in the Virginia Code include over 400 pages, and the Director of Elections must be proficient in this document. There are an average of more than 100 election laws submitted every year. 45 new election laws have been passed in the last 4 years alone. All directly affect workload and procedures. She effectively communicates with constituents of Rappahannock County, advertises important election dates, updates county web page information. She's involved in community outreach programs for voter registration, including voter registration day at Rappahannock County High School. She maintains an appropriate work page focused on routine and complex tasks without distraction or compromising accuracy. She completes time-sensitive tasks within the required time frame. She's responsible for FOIA compliance for her office and for the Board of Electors. She provides voter call center and election day call center for election officials at polling locations. And she registers, schedules, makes travel arrangements for the staff and electoral board to attend annual training and other events and meetings.
I just want to break this down. Okay, this is really, really important. We're talking about a department head. And again, this is for the record. Right now, our Director of Elections acts as an HR director, an office manager, the Director of Elections, an absentee voting officer, a budget director, contingency planner, an emergency manager, a records officer, a data analyst, a GIS coordinator, an editor, a campaign finance officer, a candidate manager, a continuing education administrator, an IT director, a legal analyst, a media relations officer, a voter advocate, a supervisor, a FOIA officer, a customer service agent, and a travel agent. If that is not a department head, and this is not a position where somebody is just a housewife coming in and sitting and working at a desk and doing menial tasks, I don't know how much more a department head could possibly do, and this is what happens on a daily basis in our office.
Additional support for this request can be found in the interim county administrator's exit report. For example, she stated that there's no job description for county positions. Well, there's an exception. Virginia Department of Elections has a comprehensive handbook, including both the electoral board and the Director of Elections job description. Every Director of Elections duty is outlined by the Virginia Department of Election, and each duty is mandated by Commonwealth law. Here it is. That's the book that she's responsible for knowing, and it governs every aspect of her operation and the operation of the electoral board. The second point made by the county administrator is that there's no consistent employee evaluation system for county positions. There's an exception. The electoral board is required by law to conduct an annual general registrar performance evaluation and submit our findings to the Department of Elections. The Director of Elections has received the highest possible evaluation in each of the last 6 years, as you might expect. And the final one that we're referring to on the exit report is there's no pay and classification system in Rappahannock County. Quoting, "This causes unfairness in compensation internally." That's what we're talking about. Now, supplements have been granted to the constitutional officers that substantially exceed what other similarly sized counties offer, and these supplements appear to be arbitrary. They're at least $20,000 above the General Assembly established minimum compensation, which is based on population and is reimbursed by the Virginia Compensation Board. Now, at this point, I want to point out we are in no way criticizing these departments or their compensation. We're just asking for fairness. Now, I refer you to Exhibit A, which is the folder. You can all look at it. This shows you for some selected constitutional officers what their current pay is, the FY20 pay, what the compensation board budgets for this, and therefore what the difference is in their supplement that is not being reimbursed. And you look at the staff, look how much on each staff the county is paying that's not being reimbursed. Look at the treasurer. $86,916, but the comp board budget's only $64,000, so there's a $22,000 supplement. And for the staff, they're $80,000 in the hole. Court of Circuit Clerk Court, the same. Now, these are the budgeted numbers. The actual numbers that they're, I think at this point that they're reimbursing are even lower than the budgeted numbers. So, for example, for the treasurer and the staff, the supplements are $117,000. For the Commissioner of Revenue staff, they're $110,000. So, this is what we're looking at. These are exceptional raises, and they're not in any way consistent with the population involved. For example, some of these, one of them is based on a population of 40,000 to 70,000. Another one is based on the population of 20,000 to 40,000. You know, we're in the $0 to $10,000 range. So there seems to be no rhyme or reason why these are like they are. And as we've looked at the budget requests over the years, there would be requests for an increase in salary, and the description or the reason given would be market considerations or market, market what?
Based increase.
Yeah, a market-based increase. But they bear no relationship to the sort of situation that's imposed on the registrar. So by contrast, there's been no increase via supplement for the Director of Elections since 2007. The only change in compensation was a result of additional hours worked due to Commonwealth legislation making all part-time officers full-time. You might remember that. And we had to pull teeth to get that one. How many times did we have to appear before this board for a simple proposition where the law required the registrar to work 500 more hours per year? And we took her annual hourly rate, times it by 500, and came up with a number that took us 3 meetings to have accepted. But that's in the past. The Rappahannock County Cost of Living Index is more aligned with that of Northern Virginia, not Madison, Page, Culpeper, or Warren counties. If If this is the market-based condition referred to in the budget request for the other constitutional officers, it must also be applied to the Director of Elections. Now, additional support for this request comes from the GREB work group study. By way of background, in May of 2014, the State Board of Elections, at the direction of the House Rules Committee, established the GREB work group with the task of reviewing the duties and responsibilities of the Commonwealth's 133 electoral boards, that's where the EV comes from, and general registrars, GRs, and developed suggestions and changes to recommend to the Virginia General Assembly. In 2015, a GREB work group study final report, not an insubstantial piece of work, stated such a job pattern for general registrars is remarkably similar to that of a locality treasurer, constant service with peak periods during the year, and specific legal requirements and guidelines to ensure integrity and accountability. The GREB work group recognizes that similar work patterns to locality treasurers and essential service to the locality are more alike than different, and therefore recommends that salary and population brackets for Director of Elections be the same as that of the treasurer, including additional compensation for completing specific certification programs as part of continuing education. This study has been updated annually without changing this basic conclusion. And any further study of this matter, obviously, will have to start and be based on this 2015 study and conclusion. The Assembly likes to kick things down the road. We're going to have another study, apparently. The study's already been done. It's been updated every year, and it's going to end up the same. So they're kicking this down the road just to avoid dealing with the subject. So my conclusion, our conclusion is, due to the complexity and responsibilities of the Director of Elections positions, the legal consequence of failing to do the job correctly or to follow the code, plus the ever-increasing legally sensitive workload, this position should be acknowledged to be a department head. Also, based on the 2015 GREB work group study, the compensation for this position should be in parity with the local treasurer as a matter of elemental fairness. The Electoral Board, therefore, respectfully requests Rappahannock County to correct this arbitrary and discriminatory disparity in salaries among our department heads in anticipation of the establishment of a county-wide pay scale. Now, a revised salary proposal is attached to Exhibit B. What the Director of Elections is asking for is the $64,399, which is the minimum compensation for a treasurer in a population bracket of 0 to 10,000, which is us, plus the $15,769 current supplement, plus the 6% raise, and that comes out to $84,970, which is actually less than what the treasurer makes. This is important. The above scenario eliminates the concern that it was expressed that the salary somehow would exceed that of the Rappahannock County treasurer in the future if there was adjustment to population compensation brackets. This would always keep it in line. So that concern is eliminated. We also think in fairness that the assistant registrar, who's a senior deputy should have her salary increased. She's been here for 7 years. The only increase to her salary was a result of a change to full-time status and percentages here and there. The assistant registrar is equivalent of a senior deputy. She's trained to complete all of the duties of the office in the event of the Director of Elections' absence. We divided the treasurer staff compensation by 2 because they have 2 staff. We only have 1, to come up with a our base salary request, which ends up being $51,286. So that's an increase of her position of $13,036. The registrar's request is an increase of $22,733. So a total increase for both positions of $35,769. Now, if you look at the funding sources, the second item there, the estimated reimbursement for costs of the 2020 presidential primary, it's got to be taken into consideration. That's not something that just falls out of the sky that we get for free. That is based on very careful bookkeeping and record keeping by the registrar of every cost involved in that election, which is then reimbursed. And it's not reimbursed if it's not recorded and kept track of. In the past, she's done just a marvelous job of getting this reimbursement for past elections because of her record keeping. So that's where we are. A question of fairness, a question of not discriminating, a question of treating her like a department head, a question of paying her like a department head. And I know there's all sorts of quibbles, and you can go into all sorts of minutia and dive way down in the weeds, but that's the proposal. She does the work that's equivalent to a treasurer. She should be paid the same as the treasurer. And with that, we'll entertain any questions.
I have a question. This, on your Exhibit A, circuit clerk, that's the clerk of the court, correct? And this is a question. In your minds, in Exhibit A here, Commissioner of the Revenue, Treasurer, Clerk of the Court, constitutional officers that are elected by the people.
The registrar can't be elected for obvious reasons.
Well, I understand that. Do you think that, there's any reason that there should be a distinction and a difference between an elected person,
Absolutely not.
constitutional officer, and a...
I think that they're a constitutional officer because they're mentioned in the Constitution. I don't think there's any difference between what they do and their value to the community. That's just it's incidental that they happen to have that title.
Well,
Look at what they do.
Title aside, then, what about elected versus hired county position? You think there's any distinguishing value between those two?
No, because they do the same work. Obviously, by law, she cannot be elected. There's nobody who, could serve. So, again, it's coincidental. Look at the work they do, in fairness. Look at the work they do. Look at their value to the county. The treasurer brings in money. She brings in voters. The voters vote for you people. You approve money. I mean, we go round and round on that stuff. But
Very important, no doubt,
yeah.
no doubt.
And again, as I say, it's a serious proposal. We don't think, bottom line, we're asking for that much money for the registrar and her staff. And we think it all ought to be done on the same basis. We don't think she ought to be governed by one set of very narrow restrictions in terms of, the population and all that sort of stuff when nobody else is. What you've set up there is a discriminatory process. If it can be proved that she does the same work, but isn't getting paid on the same basis, that could be a problem. And so,
I would like to speak to the discriminatory allegation, I guess.
it's not, it's not.
Either question for you, Gary, or for the board. Is the registrar is hired by the electoral board? Is that correct?
Appointed by the electoral board.
Appointed by the electoral board, okay.
And that is critically important to
Okay,
keep
why not? Go ahead.
independence from the process and
Right.
registering voters to vote for, for others. I've had a lot of dialogue with the electoral board and the registrar on this, and I will say I don't disagree that we want locally our staff to be compensated fairly. each of the constitutional officers and the registrar have their salaries funded by the state and the county. And it's the state who is falling well short of their obligation for the registrar. And the GREB report makes that very clear. That report is to the General Assembly to tell them the tables and the salaries for the registrars are too low. They should be on par with the tables for the treasurer. And the General Assembly will do what they do. In the FY20 budget, the supplement in terms of local dollars applied. So we receive a certain number of dollars for the treasurer, we receive a certain number of dollars for the registrar from the state. The county pays $28,657 of the treasurer's salary in FY20 with a 3% increase. The county will pay $31,595 for the registrar's salary in the FY20 budget. So,
Benefits?
no, that's direct salary. We also receive some funding from the comp board for fringes. We receive nothing from the state for the registrar, and so the county pays the entirety of the fringes. And the county does receive some funding for the deputy, one of the deputies, and none, we've received some for the electoral board members themselves. So I do believe there's an imbalance, but I strongly believe the imbalance is from the state. And I can't advocate that the county fix the state's problem.
Gary,
You can. And I really think the electoral board is treading on thin water with 3 of you here and 2 of you engaging without it being a called meeting.
may I just ask then, then maybe this is a matter of semantics, because if we're looking at the fact that the county supplements, just for example, the treasurer and the staff over $117,000, well then maybe we should ask for a higher supplement. I mean, I don't know how to make this equal. If we ask for more money as a salary and we're told that, well, we're only getting paid in the 0 to 10,000 population bracket, but the other people are not getting paid in that, and then we find out that we have so much being supplemented by the county, well then maybe we should just ask for much larger supplements.
The treasurer is being paid for in that same bracket, and the bracket is higher for treasurer in the state's eyes. Why?
Not true. She's being paid in a different bracket.
It's whatever the comp board authorizes.
No.
So we're
Well,
getting,
we have the paperwork
Yeah.
here though.
It's
we
not
get
true.
$58,000 a year.
Based on a different population, and a population that does not correspond to the population of our county. And we have the information here. But to get to your final point, what you're saying is you're going to punt because the state won't do anything. So you're going to say, we're not going to be fair until the state is fair, and you have it in your ability to pay the registrar anything that you want to pay her, because the law provides that her supplement can be anything that you agree to. So you, county, could cure the problem and wait for the state to catch up.
You're absolutely right.
One point of order, I think Mr. Curry's absolutely correct. The two of y'all engaging, I think it's.
Okay, I guess my comment would be that we assiduously have avoided talking to any member of,
I understand.
I've talked to Kim.
And I appreciate it, and I love everybody, but I think one of y'all may have to sit back in the chairs or something. Well, no, I don't think it's such a matter of that, it's just we have 2 members of a 3-member body engaging, and it's not a called meeting, and
well, how would you have us corrected, Ron?
I think y'all have to delegate one of y'all to talk to us today.
All right, then I'm going to leave, and Kit will leave also, or Kit.
Well, I don't think
You
you
don't
have
have
to
to
leave.
You're just saying one spokesperson?
Yes.
Okay, well, we apologize if it gave the
It's
impression.
majority of your 3-member body engaging with this body.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought
I'm sorry.
legally that if we weren't conversing with each other, that it wasn't a meeting.
If you're conversing with us as a.
Well, okay, yeah, we'll slice that down the middle, and we'll accept your conclusion on it.
I appreciate Gary calling our attention to it, I
Yeah.
wasn't really paying attention.
We thought about it, and I used to be a lawyer, and I apologize if it appears wrong.
It may be just an appearance. And I think
And
that
that's important. Maybe you should have considered that.
I mean, I'd like to continue the discussion, and if you've got to find out something by Monday, then we don't want you to leave.
Okay. Well, all right. I think between Kim and I, we should be able to answer questions.
Thank you.
Yes, you're,
You know, in regards to constitutional officers elected, appointed, I just would like to share with you that I am sworn to uphold the Constitution. I take an oath like everybody else does, and I serve the same population also. And again, you know, I can't be elected because who would do my election?
yeah, that's,
I get that.
Glad there's
I
a-
wasn't advocating for that.
right.
Right.
That's a unique consideration, but I don't think it goes to the question of there being a substantial difference between the department heads.
And the electoral board is appointed by a panel of judges.
Yeah.
It's very, very well vetted. You know,
But the whole election process, as you know, is very, very well regulated.
Separation of powers and duties.
Hmm?
Separation of powers and duties.
Absolutely. I don't know what more we can add. I mean, you know, we may have a slight disagreement on, you know, who should go first and all that. And you understand our position. We think it's a question of fairness. It shouldn't be up to the state to solve it. If you see and recognize that there's a disparity and discrimination might be too strong a word. I mean, I wouldn't stress that, but it's a question of fairness. And we understand the budget implications of this, and, but it's just, doggone it, it's just time to recognize what this job entails. And I guess we'll leave it at that.
Well, I'd like to say we all agree that Kim's doing a fantastic job.
Do you want me to clarify about the brackets, Mr. Curry? Or no?
You can do
I've
that.
said enough. It's the board's meeting.
I have just a housekeeping question, if I might, Mr. Chairman. Gary, when we put together all the income side of the budget, did we include the $35,000
Yes.
that we receive in the, okay.
And that's the crux of the issue. We only get $35,000 from the state for the entire operation, while the other offices to which they're comparing, we get much more. And it just comes down to that.
Yeah, but that's,
And so the question is, the board can provide as many local dollars to this department as you want. I don't know the distinction between a department head or something. That's got nothing to do with the dollars. You don't even have that defined anywhere.
Right, I think we might be talking apples and oranges, and I'm sorry if I wasn't specific enough, but there's $34,376 is the reimbursement for the Director of Elections compensation. I understand that you've accounted for that on the front end, but my question was on the $35,000, that's included as a funding source for the estimated reimbursement for the cost of the 2020 presidential primary. Did we include that as on the income side?
I did not. It's
Okay.
a one-time source of revenue that we may get depending on, you know, it's dependent on what our expenses are and then reimbursement for those expenses. So we would appropriate that when we know what it is.
but
And
eventually.
I would not recommend it be put towards a recurring expense unless you know that it's a whole for FY '21.
I understand.
I have a question, I guess I could give myself permission to do this. I've been here a lot of years, as everyone knows, but, and I'm gonna try to rely on memory, which sometimes, as Mr. Frazier says, it's not a good idea. But it seems like to me at one time, the registrar didn't work a 40-hour week, that it was like 3 days and 2. Is that changed?
Oh, yeah. In fact, that was acknowledged by the state, and they made all the registrars full-time.
Now, what, do you know when that was?
2017.
Okay,
2007.
so
And that's the only change to the salary that he was referring to.
And
was a
because
result
that
of
recognized the fact that a lot of registrars were already working full-time, but getting paid for part-time. And
Right.
we had tried, even before that law was changed, to have it acknowledged that it was really a full-time job. We weren't successful in that, but then the state changed the law because they recognized the increased complexity.
And that makes more sense.
Yeah. And we can attest to the fact that she's busy every day. For example, in those days, they didn't have the DMV registrations. Those come in every day. And as I stated before, every one of them just about is wrong. And so they have to track down the people, send letters out and all this stuff. That's just one aspect of the change in workload. But,
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Can I say something?
quick on your head.
You already signed it.
Kidding.
Well, even with the full, the county fully funding what we're proposing, the total that the county would be supplementing for two of us would be $101,000. Currently, taking supplements into account for the other positions, for the staff, which is 2 people for the treasurer, the state only reimburses, or they're proposing to reimburse for FY '20, $8,279. The rest of the $96,726
For
is
the
funded
staff.
by the county. So the total that the county supplements for 3 staff members in the treasurer's office is $117,000. For the commissioner of revenue, it's $110,000. What we're proposing is $101,000, which is, splitting hairs, I get it. I'm a taxpayer also, so I get it.
It's pretty close.
But in the discussion of equity and fairness, that's where the numbers.
And you have one staff member, your assistant director?
Yeah.
And she is also full-time, correct?
Yeah.
Because that was the other
We could
change.
use 3 more, but. So,
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
thank you very much, and thank you, Gary, for conversing back and forth.
Yeah, it's been very, very
I do
helpful.
appreciate it.
Oh, my gosh.
Brings us to the library.
Hi, I'm Victoria Fortuna, and I'm the Vice President of the Library Board of Trustees. And we're here to request that our full budget for salaries be increased from a 3% increase to a 5% increase for the library staff. It's not a large amount of money, it's just under $3,300. And the library board views this as vital to the retention of the 3 employees that we have. The library board has been basically making up quite a shortfall in our budget to the tune of about $40,000 a year from our bequests. And we feel that the county should fully fund our 5% request because all of the county employees who work for the library are woefully underpaid compared to other county positions, as well as if you look at other types of library positions outside the county. This year, the employees and the board have expanded the fiber and increased the Wi-Fi capabilities of the library. We funded most of the maintenance for the library out of our bequests, and we just believe that our employees should receive 5% because of the excellent job they're doing this year. And Dave is here to.
I just want to reiterate, everyone knows we got this generous request, and want to make sure that everyone understands that that allowed us, working with the school and Robin, to bring fiber services, the board has a expansion committee, we're looking at all that. I just want to make sure everybody understands that the board is being very serious stewards of that request, and that we've already used a portion of it to enhance services and so.
I can see not wanting to use that for salaries. We're in the same situation as we just discussed earlier.
And I think also the fact that we receive these requests is an indication of the value that the citizens recognize in the staff that runs the library.
I guess, Mr. Curry, I have a question. I'm looking at the library fund, line by line here on page 21. You probably have it memorized by now. So FY 18 adopted was about 245,000, and the actual was around 273,000. How was the delta funded?
The library board elected to provide bonuses to staff
Okay,
and use some dollars for capital work.
okay.
So that came from our request. It actually came from the earnings from the request.
Right. Oh, okay.
And I just want to say, if I'm going to be engaged, I need Debbie to not open her mouth.
What's that? What?
Because I'm on the
Are we
library
on-
board.
Oh,
as
right.
library Debbie.
Yes, yes, yes. All right. So, okay,
Close to a majority of y'all here.
No, but it's 3 or more,
okay.
even if the majority is fine.
So is from 3% to 5% increase, you're saying it's $3,000? It's more than that, isn't it?
It's,
No, it is.
it's.
$3,281.30.
And that includes the benefits and the employer portion of.
Ms. Smith already pointed out to me that I made an error in the budget, thank you, and I inadvertently did not include the 3% in that line. I've since fixed it in the working draft, and that's in the list of items that have, in the next budget agenda, item that I put in front of your spot, the printout.
So that impacts the salary and wages, FICA, VRS,
Yes.
all of those,
Yeah, and
Okay.
the light.
and life.
All right, well, as usual, I'm a step behind. Okay.
Are you keeping a running total of what these additional requests, like the 100,000 capital and the registrar's office and the library, what those gonna turn into?
So, on agenda item 2, there is a list of 7 items that I've recognized in my working document that includes the correction of the commissioner revenue actual salary paid versus budgeted because they made their hire for the replacement. The correction of the library staff to incorporate the 3%. The change to the planning commission budget line item talked about and requested by the board at an earlier budget work session. Reduction of social services, legal services line at Director of Social Services recommendation. An increase in the library budget strategic planning line for extra dollars from their investment for one-time uses as requested by the library board at their last meeting. And then an increase in tower rent for Sperryville to hedge the risk of a cell provider not going on there in the first year. So that's my running list. The $100,000 capital from earlier today, I don't know if the board's taken a position on it, but it would probably be handled differently because it's in the fire services fund as opposed to the general fund. We'd have to decide how that was going to happen. And then the registrar salary similarly would have to decide what, if anything, the board wants to do. And I can work all that up. And I think you can have that discussion after you hear from each one of these entities that are requesting a change. In the next agenda item, we maybe can narrow down to a point on what you want advertised, which may not be the same thing that you adopt, likely won't be the same thing you adopt in the middle of May.
So you're you're saying with all these things 1 through 7, not the fire and rescue apparatus, 100,000 not included, add up to a surplus of about $30,000.
Correct.
What you're recommending goes to the contingency fund, but which we could use for other.
Well, yeah, basically, what I'm recommending is that we reduce the amount of general fund balance we're using to prop up the contingency fund. Put some recurring dollars into that. And ultimately to wait until after the public hearing and figure out, you may need those for some other purpose that comes up. But that's just a recommendation. I also want to say, during the meetings in the library board relative to this, there was a discussion and a vote to authorize the Vice President, Ms. Fortuna, to come to the board and request these additional funds. I abstained from that vote just because I'm kind of on both sides of that ledger, trying not to muddy those waters of asking myself for money in my proposed budget. I'm recommending to you.
It was a very nice conversation with yourself.
I listen sometimes.
We appreciate it. I guess for me, if I might, Mr. Chairman, what might be instructive and helpful for me is similar background to what we just heard about what surrounding localities do, or if there's any state mandated or state recommendations to justify this increase, because what you're asking for is more than other employees are receiving.
Well, I'll just say that, for example, the elementary school librarian makes $10,000 more than David, and the high school librarian makes $10,000 more than Amanda, who has 2 master's degrees and 17 years of experience. David has over 20 years of experience. And the local counties that are around, I mean, obviously, Culpeper and Fauquier counties are much larger, but the library director in Culpeper County is making about $118,000. David makes $55,000. The Fauquier County head library director makes $112,000, and the Warren County library director makes $82,000. So, I mean, we have discussed this. We've had quite a turnover in the library board of trustees, as you know, and we are going to undertake a full salary review for these individuals, because it seems that we're out of whack. We're not in the market.
And this board has no control over, the school employees and what they're paid.
Yes, yeah, that's true, but
Did you have any numbers for rural localities like Page or Madison County?
well, Warren County is rural county. I don't have numbers for Page County.
Okay, I'll check those out.
Oh, you do?
We'll get those.
We do. No, we don't. And that's part of what we need to look at this year for our proposed budget for next year. But I think just those numbers in and of themselves are quite different. And
I wanted to add too about the starting salary for a teacher at this school is $44,000, starting salary with a master's degree. And as Victoria pointed out, our assistant director and YA children's librarian has 2 master's degrees, 7 years experience, and isn't at that level.
isn't even at the level.
So I feel that, I can't speak to what other employees get, but it's a market adjustment as well as and I think it's vital for retention and also for recruitment, because I know we're not Culpeper County and we're not Fauquier, but that's who we compete against when we hire people and when we provide our services, so.
And we do get people from Culpeper coming here and other counties.
Yeah, we get a lot. The one that gave us the $1 million request was from Culpeper County, and I always want to point that out because she chose this library because of services that she got and the way she felt about it.
people here, they end up doing everything that's necessary on a day-to-day basis to maintain the library and to offer the services that the library offers. So, I mean, little items
Right,
like.
we don't have an IT person, we don't have a, I mean, that's all falls to the staff. Maybe, day-to-day operating. So you got two, you and two, correct, who's the third? Denise Krasinski, library clerk, and Amanda is here. Amanda, you're full-time, right?
Yes,
Is
sir.
Denise, she's also full-time?
Yes,
And,
the library's open 48 hours a week.
and our children's program and the attendance at the preschool story time continues to grow, which I think is very interesting because, we're not thinking the school is down or we're losing students, but this is the future of the county and the future citizens. And every year we increase our summer reading program, teen reading program. Our circulation is very healthy for children, so that's a good sign that the library is being very well used by future citizens of the county.
You know, the library circulated over 30,000 books, audios, DVDs, magazines, etc. It's on the little handout that David.
Any more questions on library? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
We love the library, by the way, they do.
We love this.
We do. I don't really have too much to add to the report that we generated really early to justify our case for our proposal, so we're here to answer any questions you may have, but I do want to say that something that we all see and feel and get in the community is how much you all really do love the kids and care about the schools. You've been there for us and have really supplied what we needed in times of need. So, and Mr. Curry's given you an excellent starting place, and as always, we'll do the best we can with whatever we get. Our needs are changing as we speak consistently. So those needs are pretty expensive now with what we're seeing with the high rates of poverty, ESL population, special needs populations and things. So even though you see smaller enrollment, that number of kids is coming to us with more needs than we've had to deal with before. So they are more expensive needs. And you see those ballooning, I think, in my colleague Jen Parker's budget as they incrementally get worse and worse as time goes on. So our approach to our proposal is really about prevention on that piece and working with our colleagues. And those investment dollars will be leveraged in the best way possible for maximum impact for preventative. You save one child from getting into her system, you're saving hundreds of thousands down the line. So we're hopeful that you'll see that pretty quickly in as little as a year or two. So that's what our proposal for the social worker indicates. And you have everything in front of you, so I don't want to take much time with that, but just ask me any questions that you have. And I have my CFO, Stacy Witt, here, and also Facilities Director, Rodney Cole, Executive Director of Administrative Services. I'm sorry, she does a lot, but for facilities, I think that'd be important.
No questions for Dr. Grimson?
Well, I've had them before. Have my questions addressed.
Who's next?
That would be me.
Yep.
The one with the towering legal budget.
Don't take offense that you're last on my list.
No, I don't. So our, as Shannon said, our efforts are now moving towards prevention services in DSS, and things are going to change, but not towards the end of 2019. as we move into Families First legislation and seeing what Virginia actually decides to do, whether or not we're going to implement it or we're going to ask for the waiver for a little bit more time to get Families First up and running. Thankfully, our community policy management team pushed forward with the LINK position, which is intensive case management for substance abusing parents and families. We worked really closely with the Community Services Board. They have hired. Yes, we have the position. So they're doing all the background checks, all the preliminary work. They're training the person through April and May. So I'm thinking about the 1st of June, we should have the LINK person up and running in my office. I've been working really, really close with Jim McGrath at the Community Services Board. He's really great and a breath of fresh air with the CSB and
a Rappahannock County citizen.
yes, he is now officially a Rappahannocken. We have adult case management services in my office running out about 3 days a week. They're working there, so that's been nice that they have somewhere that they can plug and play and work closely in Rappahannock. So, and we are finally fully staffed at DSS. So all the benefits are up and running and all the services are up and running, so we're excited about that. Our foster care caseload count is 25 children in foster care. We have 4 adults in fostering futures. Those are our kids that are between the ages of 18 and 21 that aged out of foster care but chose to stay in the skill building program. So that's where we are with our case counts. 2018, we'll talk about this legal bill since that's the elephant in the room, was a horrible year. It was tough for us. We saw very complex legal cases. We saw sibling groups. We had 5s, we had 4s, we had 3s, we had 2s that came through. Parents were appealing everything. They appealed every single court action from the emergency removal to a chins to everything that we did, they appealed. And so at one point in one case, we had 12 appeals pending in one case at one time. So every time they appeal, you know, the lawyer is working, and so we have a great attorney. Kim Chadwick is wonderful. She doesn't even bill us for everything, and she's cheap. She's $125 an hour, and you're not going to find an attorney. Yeah, she does schools. We can talk. She might. So she's really great. She doesn't even bill us for all the phone calls that I make to her in the middle of the night to run things by her. So we're lucky to have her. What we are hoping to see this year is 6 adoptions by the end of 2019. We have 6 kids ready to go. We just have to get through the waiting times. And we're hoping to send some kids home this year. So my Pride class just finished up. I'm hoping I have 10 foster families, which is a blessing in itself. We are so lucky. So we're looking at bringing some of our kids home to Rappahannock too. So that'll lighten the load on my staff of running all around the state, trying to see their kids every month. So we're excited about that. And I have people signed up for the summer training, so that's exciting too. Okay, your turn.
I'll just restate what I said earlier, that my proposed budget includes the original request of $147,501 for legal, which was based on her past expenses. She's since analyzed her more recent monthly churn and has suggested that be reduced to $135,000 rather than the $147,000. So if you divide by 125, you can find out how many hours that includes. A bunch.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I think I was one that raised some alarm at seeing that cost, and I can't really go into a lot of specifics or detail, and I think it was your predecessor where this particular case happened, but something mushroomed out of proportion and cost probably tens of thousands of dollars in hardships upon families based on a phone call where only one grandparent was home. She hadn't even talked to her husband yet. And it just mushroomed out of proportion. And I think that we need to have some sort of a dialogue system swallows up these kids and contractors start making money and lawyers start making money. I just think it's a, you know, it needs to be a little bit more.
I'm not sure I'm following.
But it's a situation that I know about that happened here in Rappahannock County. I believe it was your predecessor where it happened,
Okay.
but it didn't need to happen the way it did.
So I think I'm following what you're saying. The child came into custody, but there was a relative that was available.
There were several, there was grandparents, but there were 4 children, different
Okay.
age, and it was a real mess. And by the time I hear the story, everybody had a lawyer. The children had to have guardian ad litems, and the grandparents, you know, the different sets of grandparents had lawyers, and they all had a lawyer, and it was just a mess.
Right.
And it didn't have to happen,
So,
the way it happened.
right, and I'll just explain to you how we typically work. When we get involved with a situation, we are mandated to contact family first. We always want to put a child with a family member to lessen the trauma on the child and keep as much normalcy in their lives as possible, because family is best. Family knows family better than anyone. So when I did Child Protective Services before I became director, if I would sit with the parent when we were moving the child, do you have a mother, do you have an uncle, a sister, a cousin, even a fictive kin, you know, that Aunt Jane, who's really not your aunt, but everybody calls her Aunt Jane. One of those people that we could put your child with temporarily until we can hash all this out, rather than pick this child up and take them to Richmond with strangers that they don't know and take them away from everything that they know, just for a couple of days until we can straighten all this out and see what really is going on. So yes, that should have happened. We are supposed to look at family first. But anytime that the department is getting involved with any kind of removal situation, or even if we're looking at just doing child in need of services, protective orders, attorneys are going to get involved.
Yeah, but the level I saw of this, I thought it was funny. And it happened just so fast.
Okay.
It was just almost split-second decision.
Oh, goodness.
Again, I probably shouldn't say much more about that, but it was a real mess.
I'm sorry that happened.
Mr. Curry, question. Let's see. So FY18 actual budget for welfare administration, I guess includes all the legal services and salaries, was $866,000 and change. The amended budget was about $275,000 more. So how did we pay for that? Did we do? I'm trying to remember. Rewind the tape in my head. Did we? Am I reading that wrong?
Yeah, no, you're right. And so if you remember, we went through an additional appropriation,
Right.
supplemental appropriation process, and that was linked over to Medicaid expansion, and the state provided more revenue with that. So that was a mixture of local revenue and state revenue.
So the salaries number went up $100,000. Was that because we added another position?
Yes, and that ultimately is incorporated in that Medicaid expansion position.
Okay. So we went up to 12 and a half employees then through the Medicaid expansion. Okay. And we paid for that large increase in legal services through a separate appropriation, I guess, both, or is that how we did that?
I don't know if I know.
The 61,000 that we budgeted for turned out to be about
No. So the 61,000 was the FY18 actual,
right.
and the 139 is an FY19 budgeted. When we amended budget, when we budgeted FY19 in the beginning of the year at the same thing as 18, we simply budgeted one number for the entirety of everything that their department does.
Oh, this was part of your realignment.
And then in
Yeah.
December, we broke it all out to make sure there's full, clarity to what was happening. Which is why all those numbers, plus the added for Medicaid and whatnot, break out this way. And you can see the 8712 at the very bottom, which was, this year is the PATH grant they got to help with the Fostering Futures programs.
So some of this is, yeah, increased legal expenses, others is just showing it a different way than we've looked at it in the
Yes.
past.
Yes.
And you've explained that before, thank you.
But if you look at, I guess, the FY19 amended budget compared to the FY20 proposed budget for the welfare administration, it's about the same. And actually, the FY20 is now less because of the 12,000 or so reduction in the in
Legal
the
services.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that actually is,
And that includes the 3% raise on, you know,
so is that a $12,000 savings that is reflected in your agenda item number 2, or
yeah.
should it be added to that, or is it?
It's in number,
Number
yeah,
4?
yeah,
Okay,
item 4 in budget, in number 2.
got it.
Am I misreading this thing where it shows we have expenditures of about 3 million and revenue from other sources of about 2 million, so we're looking at about $1 million total for the social services budget for the county?
The easiest way to see that, if you go to page 5 of your budget, and at the top you can see the social services fund, and you can see the total revenue, which matches the total expense, albeit there'll be a slight change because of the change in legal services reduction. There's $1,681,000 total budget. 486,000, the number just above that, is local general fund dollars. Then there's a mixture of state and federal dollars.
And then under Children's Services Act, the CSA, we have a similar,
That's correct.
so it totals a little over $1 million, 1.1
That is
million
correct.
local dollars.
That is correct.
That's what I thought.
Do you have any other questions for the board?
Questions for me?
Thanks.
Thank you for taking a deeper dive on the legal services line. I also pushed Jen to take a deeper dive on the $100,000 number, which includes rent and power and all those other things. And it came to 99,463 itemized out in about 80 lines.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that as well. But we don't want budget on those.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Great afternoon. Enjoy the weather.
That takes care of the discussion with budget holders. If you want to move on to the next item, which is just labeled as a budget work session, I've listed and handed out to you the detailed printout for this particular item to show the changes from the document that I presented to you on the 13th. That I'm tracking through our discussions, as well as reductions and changes that I'm aware of. Most of those I don't think you would have too much of a concern with acknowledging, but I wanted to make sure you knew all those changes. Of course, we want to align the Commissioner Revenue's salaries with what is actually happening, which is what we guessed may happen before they hired the person because of the retirement and backfilling. We wanted to fix the library salaries to include at least the 3%. The 2,000 that this board talked about in an earlier meeting about the Planning Commission professional services budget line, the reduction that we just talked about for the legal services line and social services, an increase in the library budget for strategic planning to pull additional money out of their investment account to support their plans for their expansion renovation committee, hiring a design professional to guide that process. And then reduction in the regional jail contribution aligned with the approved budget at the regional board meeting that Mr. Parrish and I were at last week. And then increase increase in the tower rent from $550 to $950. And remember, that lease is based on how many cell providers are going to be on that tower. I keep hearing two different stories. The tower people tell me T-Mobile is definitely going to be on there ASAP, and then the backhaul provider can't engage T-Mobile to play nice because they say, well, we're not ready. So I don't know, so I want to make sure we're covered either way. And as we noted earlier, that leaves you in a positive position of $29,639. For me to advertise the budget, it should be balanced. So we would need to allocate that $29,639 to something. It can be any one of the requests that you heard today, something entirely different, or you could park it in, basically take less out of your general fund balance to make ends meet and park it there and then see what the public has to say about all of this at the public hearing on the 22nd.
So, Mr. Curry, can I ask you a real quick back at your envelope math question?
Yes.
Make sure I understand. So the schools are asking for another $75,000 for their salary.
Correct.
Fire and Rescue's just asked us for $100,000.
Well, they asked you for $100,000 for apparatus replacement. You could reallocate the $84,000 and change that is now assigned to emergency grants and contingency to partially support that.
Right, let me finish my thought here. And then the library asks us for about another $4,000. The registrar is asking us for about another, the electoral board's asking us for about another $35,000. And then your agenda item number 2 says we're saving about $30,000. So unless I'm missing anything else, it sounds like if you add all that up and subtract that $30,000, give everything to everybody, it would be an increase of about $185,000. Am I accurate in that? I know I went through that quickly.
Can you do that again?
Yeah, I can. Schools, thank you for asking. Schools, 75. Apparatus, 100. Library, 4,000. Is the library included in your agenda item 2?
Just do the 4%,
No.
not the 5%.
No, it's not.
Okay, so 4,000. Board of Elections, 35,000. And then you subtract out of that your agenda item 2 calculations, which was the 29,639. I came up with a little over $184,000.
I think for the apparatus line, though, you only really need to add back in 15, because it's 100,000, but we've broken out what was historically 85,000 of it into 2 other separate lines. So you could put that money back in where it
You
came
could,
from.
and I would caution you to be viewing, which buckets are we talking about? All of the fire and rescue expenses are being paid by the fire levy. So you may want to disconnect that from the other expenses that are being paid by the general
Okay.
tax. And if you were of a mind to advertise a higher tax rate to cover the different expenses, it may make sense to do it the fire levy tax rate versus the general.
Right.
Not to say you couldn't, we can transfer dollars from the general fund over to the fire services fund as well, if you wanted to do
But
that.
we're paying for some things, as I said earlier, totally out of the fire services fund, where maybe some of it should have been come out of the general fund.
Correct.
Yeah, those are one-time things, and Ms. Nick and I have talked about that some, that we could, for example, if we wanted to, pay the remaining cost of the radio system that's due a couple $100,000 out of the general fund balance instead of the fire services fund, which is being supported by the fire services fund balance. We could do that. But my thought was, well, what difference does it make? This board at any point in time can make a transfer from the general fund balance over to the fire services fund balance to buy some fire service thing.
But we
It's
can't. go the
one-time
other
dollars,
direction. We can't transfer from fire services back over to general fund.
not unless it's for a fire.
Right. And I
Purpose.
think that's the problem, is when we call, like the radio system, for instance, which is, being used by different departments, and we pay for it totally out of fire service funds, there's no money accumulating there like it may have in another instance, because we spend it all. We
Yeah,
And
so-
my argument is the radio system, I don't know what proportion it is, and I don't know what numbers to fix for those proportions, but we're paying for all of it out of
I think, technically it's fine because you can't use 80% of a radio system. So it needs to exist and there's no really added capacity to allow the sheriff and a few buses to use it. But in my mind, from an accounting perspective, you would want to use fire services fund for all items that are appropriate for that, just because it's very easy to sweep money from the general fund over to the fire services fund,
Right.
but difficult to do the other way around.
That's what I'm saying.
So you would rather spend it out of fire services fund, and then if you want to send a couple $100,000 over, you can do that.
But when you spend it all, there's no accumulation, even if it was a small amount of money. There's no accumulation there for such things as the apparatus.
But the entire pool of general fund balance and fire service fund balance is the same. It's just how much is in either pool. You still have the same amount in the savings account, it's just which category it's in.
But I know what you're saying, but I don't really agree with it because the fire services funds can't be commingled. So when we spend those down, there's no accumulation there. That's been their beef for years, that when we spend it like that, it doesn't accumulate.
Well, it doesn't accumulate when we spend all the revenue we receive on in-year expenses. And so if there was a thought to take everything that's coming in is being allocated right now in fire services. But two of those lines are the emergency grants and the contingency. So if you allocate those dollars to money that's going out the door, there will be no money accumulated, period. Now, you could raise the tax rate and just allow that money to go to the fund balance, the fire service fund balance, if you want to build up a savings account in the fire services fund balance.
We may would want that for the apparatus,
You could, and
and then the county make the decision as to what apparatus we purchase.
yeah, and I would be a strong advocate to make the agreement say those things, if that's how we're gonna operate.
You get the menu agreement for all the above.
Exactly.
But, that document should help everybody involved understand exactly how the revenue is gonna flow and who's responsible for what. And it does right now, but.
Right.
It just might not have captured everything up front.
Right.
I don't know how board members feel, but just throw it out there for everybody's discussion. Because Mr. Curry is recommending that we advertise something a little higher than what's needed to balance the proposed budget. $150,000 per penny on the real estate tax. I don't know, and fire levy, should we advertise for a 1 cent increase, just so we can have some money to, or maybe higher, I don't know.
Well, I was thinking a penny on each myself.
On each.
That works.
I think, would you put, Gary, 2 cents on the general, or you just put 2 cents total?
Well, it just so happens the draft document that I have prepared
I have no previous knowledge.
suggests 1 penny increase on real estate and 1 penny on the fire levy real estate, and then also 10 cents on the personal property for the fire levy, which it gives you some options. 10 cents gives you about 60,000 that you might want to allocate. Now, there are a lot of pros and cons to doing that, and when you raise the personal property tax rate, you have to understand that those businesses are going to be hit harder than others because they don't get the benefit of the PPTR state.
People rent.
And the people that, right, well, they may get hit through increased rent eventually.
So there's a few small ways that we can also add, to the income side of the balance sheet. And I know we had a few emails about the meals and lodging tax and how those break out and where those monies go.
Yeah.
And if I recall correctly, do you have any comparisons or maybe Ms. Nick, how the surrounding localities compare to our 4% and 2%?
I think 4 is as high as we can go without General Assembly support.
On the meals?
But the 2, I think, there's some specific legislation that speaks to that, and tourism and a few other things. I'm not positioned to really answer that right
Because
now.
that looks like it would maybe allow us to tap into like $60,000 to $80,000 in additional revenue if we were able to increase that a percent.
If it's elastic, yeah.
Yeah.
We've never, ever had a discussion about people.
Well, and yeah, so BPOL is it's annually under attack by the General Assembly, but I think, given the number of businesses we have, it would be a pretty big paper chase in the Commissioner of Revenue's office for, by the time you try to track it all, levy the taxes, collect, I don't know how much you're gonna
Right,
get out
well,
of the process.
both BPO and Purchase Capital are punitive because they're not really based on income, they're based on something that's really not tangible.
Areas where I like that is where, in the retail side, where you have a lot of people from outside coming to your community, and you have a Walmart, and you can increase their BPOL tax for retail a little bit, and we did that where I was from, and you're really, hitting everybody around you to pay your taxes. Now, it hits your people too. But I think we could do an analysis on that. I would not want to do it in the time between now and
No. I
adopting
just
this
thought I'd
budget.
put that on the table, but I really think it's revenue neutral. It may even cost us money.
But it does, what people also does is allow you to find out what businesses you have in the county.
That's true.
Frankly, right now, we don't have a good handle on that, so there is that piece of it too, for better or for worse.
I know businesses, owners that wish they could pay their taxes in the county, builders that do work in surrounding counties and end up paying, taxes to those counties, and they
Right.
wish,
If I could
They
go
wish
down a
they
rabbit
could-
trail a minute,
yeah,
I read the statute because a friend of mine is in a bottleneck over in Culpeper, and the statute reads, if you pay the required amount of business license tax in your jurisdiction, then the others can't charge you. We don't require one. So by the very, nature of reading that law the way it's written, we shouldn't be, and I
We
had to
shouldn't
do
be
it too when
required
I
to
was
pay.
running a business in all those counties. I'm not required to pay one here, so I've met that requirement.
right.
Yeah, you could potentially give a tax break by setting a BPOL rate at .00001. But then
No, but I mean-
then you have to pay for it with the office staff.
But what they say is because we don't have a county business license here, that we have to buy one in every jurisdiction where we go, and I had to do that because it was simpler to just, go along to get along. But the problem is, if I met the requirement here, actually I shouldn't have to pay it anywhere else. I get over to Loudoun County, and I had this discussion with Mr. Luke, I don't know, 1987 or something like that. I get over to Loudoun County, and they had a crazy thing that said that, to get the Loudoun County electrical contractor's license, you had to certify that you were going to do work in accordance with the 1957 Electrical Code of Loudoun County. And I said, okay, before I sign this affidavit, can I see a copy of that? And they said, you're the first one who's ever asked that question. That's not my fault, but that's how goofy it is in these other jurisdictions. 30 years later, they can't furnish me something that I've got to attest to that I'm going to do. That's
Well,
how
I'm
crazy it is.
sure we're not going to resolve BPOL this afternoon.
No, but, anyway, just,
So what we gotta do now is decide how we're gonna advertise.
Yeah, I need two things to advertise. We're going to advertise for two public hearings, the tax rate public hearing, which can have rates that are higher than is necessary to balance the budget, which we just talked about. I also need to advertise the budget public hearing, which lists out the entire budget, department by department. We talked about that last year, about potentially doing that by function, the board wanted to stay by department. So I've got that ready now. I'll have to change whatever numbers change based on this conversation. We need to advertise both things. So I need to know whether we want to increase any of the different lines that were talked about today or any other time, or reduce any lines. And then how to allocate the $29,639, and then what rates we want to advertise.
Do we want to reach this decision today, or do we want to meet tomorrow?
And that is entirely up to the
We're
board.
here, let's do it today.
I have a funeral tomorrow. Right in the middle of the day.
And so I'll just reiterate that this is for purposes of advertising for your public hearing. and what you adopt subsequent to that can make changes. And very likely will make changes based on what you heard today and what you hear at the public hearing. You may have 1,000 people come talk to you about the amount of money we use to.
Well, let's go ahead.
Can we take a short 5-minute recess?
Recess 5 minutes. Call the meeting back to order.
So all we have to figure out is what to advertise here. We mentioned just going ahead and advertising an extra penny on the real estate, an extra penny on the fire levy service, and maybe 10 cents on the personal property, and hopefully we won't have to do any of it, but advertise that.
But we have to do it by line item to tell Mr. Curry how to advertise it.
Right. So as far as the increase on the personal property, I was recommending that for the fire levy portion.
Okay, that's fine. Let's do that.
Because the 60,000 might align with their need.
Right.
Not that, if you wanted to have that pool in the background, you did a
Right.
penny, then whatever
Right.
you don't spend is going to
Right.
the fund
Yeah,
balance.
because it is
All
a
right,
fire
a
levy
penny
issue.
each and 10 cents on the personal fire levy?
That's,
A penny on the fire levy, a penny on the real estate, a penny on the real estate fire levy.
150.
And,
Well,
I guess that's it, right?
Well, I think, for the purposes of public discussion, and I imagine that we want to hear about it from the schools, do you need to know how much of that increase that they've proposed that we want to
No,
advertise? Or
so two different things.
no? Okay, then I'm assuming.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My proposed budget will turn into your proposed budget and would include the corrections shown in budget in agenda item 2 here,
Right.
A2, whatever, letter 2. And then I need to know how to incorporate into my proposed budget that extra $29,639. You could do that on a line-by-line method now, or you could simply reduce the amount that you're pulling from fund balance right now to balance the budget. That would change one more line on this big advertisement that will go in the paper. Then, on a separate public hearing ad, you will advertise the rates. Those rates do not have to be the same as what's used to balance the budget. They can be higher than that. So, I recommend that you advertise higher than that, so that when you go to the public hearing, and you have a whole lot of people coming forward saying, we really think you should fund extra $75,000 to the schools and $35,000 to the registrar and whatever, you have the wherewithal to do that without cutting something else, if you wanted to.
So if you advertise each one of those department lines and you have to jiggle them to make us spend that money there, do you have to break it all down into every bit of minutia?
Yes, so what I've done is each one of those department lines is what's in here, with the exception of the 7 corrections that I've listed in the agenda. And I'm proposing we make one more correction, which would be to the line at the very bottom of the revenue, on the bottom of page 4, which is from to general fund balance. Right now, it lists $612,000. So with that $612,000, we have $29,000 too much. So I would just reduce that number by $29,647, whatever it is, $639. And then the budget would be balanced. But it would still allow you to increase that, increase any other line you want after the public hearing, after hearing from everybody, so long as you have revenue to do that. And the revenue to do that would come from an increased tax, or you could shift expenses from one category to
All right, so
another.
you don't have to advertise those lines with increases in it right now?
I have to show the FY19 amount and the FY20 amount, proposed FY20.
But I think Mr. Frazier's question is the same one as mine, and I think you've answered it. The way I understand it is, the fact that you're proposing in the ad to raise the tax that was,
Sorry.
yeah, that's,
It'll be confusing, and it is often confusing. The public will say, you're gonna raise my taxes. Not necessarily. It's an opportunity, but if you advertise the exact tax rates needed to balance the budget,
we're locked
you
in.
cannot increase them after the public hearing, unless you were to go through another public hearing, which there probably wouldn't be time before you adopt the school budget. You know, it gets packed in.
All right, so I think we're all in agreement on doing that.
Do you need a motion?
I would like,
So
Yes.
so let's just clarify, so that is to advertise in the tax rate public hearing, to advertise 68 cents on the real estate tax as opposed to current 67. 7 cents on the fire levy real estate as opposed to 6, which is current. 4.25 on the personal property, which is currently 4.25, and 30 cents on the fire levy personal property, which is currently 20. And the same $25 per year for our license tax sticker, which we don't have a sticker anymore.
I'll second Mr. Fraser's motion.
Right, and then the 29, you gotta put that back in.
Hold on, let's do one.
Okay.
Yeah, the 29 gets reflected in here right away. Yeah.
So that was Fraser moved and Speed.
Motion made and second.
Aye.
It's not a roll call, right? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And I also.
Okay, so then the second action would be to, what to advertise for the budget, and if that would be my proposed budget, incorporating the 7 changes in the agenda item C2, and reducing the general fund balance by the $29,639 to balance the budget out for the purposes of the Board of Supervisors budget public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye also. All opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you. Item C2 is just a reminder of the schedule, which you're, would like a motion just to be clear that you will not be meeting tomorrow. I can cancel that meeting.
I'll make that motion that we cancel tomorrow's meeting.
I'll second that.
Motion made and second. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, nay. We will not meet tomorrow.
Okay, I will post that to board docs. The next item on the agenda is item D, old business regarding public safety radio system approvals. This is related to backhaul. I'm not prepared to make a recommendation at this time. Happy to answer any questions if you have any.
You gave us your latest in our weekly summary.
You have an email, I think, this
Oh,
morning,
something on Facebook this morning? Oh, okay.
maybe yesterday. They all the dates blend together.
Okay, then the next item is public comment.
Yesterday.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Anyone wishing or caring to speak will have the opportunity to do so. Please raise your hand if you recognize. State your name, district that you're in. Direct your comments to the board, and I declare public comment open. Anyone care to speak? Anyone care to speak? I declare public comment closed. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And I also. Have a great day, gentlemen. Ladies. Maybe it should have been ladies and gentlemen.